I told y'all a couple of weeks ago that I absolutely love superhero movies. I told y'all a couple of weeks ago I absolutely love superhero movies. And that for me, Jesus was like a real life superhero. With all the superpowers and everything else. And every superhero has an origin story that tells us how they became a superhero in the first place. And so in this series, we're looking at Jesus' origin story and discovering some things about our own origin stories of faith. Now, every good origin story has certain elements to it. The first thing is that you have to know who the hero is, right? So the hero is identified and called out. And Jesus was identified and called out at his baptism and God said, "You are my son, I love you, you have a call on your life." And God does the same thing. We each have a call in our lives that God affirms in our baptism. Now, the second element of any good origin story is that we have to know what the hero can do. And so we have the superpowers revealed. And for Jesus, that was at the wedding at Cana, where he turned water into wine and kept the party going. And each of us, like Jesus, have superpowers. They're not superpowers like Jesus, but we have spiritual gifts that are given to us from God that help us to fulfill the call in our lives of building up the body of Christ and transforming the world. Well, this week we are talking about the third element of any good origin story, which is the hero's first battle. First time they really face off with the enemy. And for Jesus, immediately after his baptism, he was led by the Spirit out into the wilderness where he faced off with Satan. And this rite of passage, this story is mentioned in all four Gospels. And I wondered why is it so important? Why is the story so important? Why does it matter so much that Jesus has to go through this test, this face-off with Satan, before he can begin his ministry? And I think as I look at it, that it comes down to three words: preparation, worthiness, and trust. And so looking at that first word, preparation, when I was, a couple of months ago, I was talking to Jocelyn, and we were having a conversation about things, and how you talk about, back when I was a kid, right? Well, I was telling her about my days in boot camp, and how all the things that they made us go through, and how we didn't get any sleep, and we didn't get any food, and we crawled through the mud, and they yelled at us every chance they got, and they punished us for things that we didn't even know we did wrong, right, Wayne? Sometimes you got punished you woke up and they're immediately getting punished. You don't even know what you did yet. And they were doing all these things that they were, that 3 months at that time in my life was like the hardest thing that I had ever gone through. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was awful. It was torture. It was terrible. She's like, why would they do that to you? Why in the world? And I said, well, because they knew that eventually, one day, I might actually be facing a real enemy with real guns and real bullets who really want to kill me. And they wanted me to be mentally and physically ready for that. So they put us through all of the hardest stuff that they could think of to put us through, short of actually killing us, to get us ready. Well, in the same way, Jesus' journey into the wilderness, this fasting and this battle with Satan, they weren't an end in themselves. It wasn't just a battle to be won, but it was preparation for the things that he was going to face later. It was a time of honing and sharpening and perfecting his gifts and his call and his identity in preparation for his ministry and the battles that were going to come as a result of it, leading up to his ultimate battle in the garden, where he surrendered to death and he fought against sin and death and overcame it in resurrection. In the same way, in our lives, our struggles in the wilderness aren't just about winning the battle that we're currently facing. And the reality is that even if we got through that battle in our lives, and even if we came out on top, we haven't truly passed the test if we haven't reflected on the challenges that we face and grown from it. James, the brother of Jesus, put it this way. It's awesome. James, the brother of Jesus, put it this way. He said, "My brothers and sisters, think of the various tests you encounter as occasions for joy. After all, you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let this endurance complete its work so that you may be fully mature, complete, and lacking in nothing." What if we saw the battles that we face? The battles that we have at home, the battles that we have in our relationships, the battles that we have in work, the struggle that we have maybe with finances or with people around us. What if we saw those battles that we face as preparation for battles that we're going to be facing in the future? How would that change our response? What if we use those struggles and those difficulties and the battles we face as an opportunity to depend more deeply upon God and allow God to perfect our gifts and refine our call? When we find that maybe we were more worthy to face the battles that were coming when they got here. Which brings me to that second word, worthiness. Worthiness, up to this point, as far as we know, up to this point, Jesus had never really been tested. He'd never really gone through any actual real test. And so the question that was following Jesus' baptism, just like Satan kept saying, well, since you are the Son of God, right? Well, since you are called, are you worthy? That was the question on everybody's lips following his baptism. His mom knew who he was called to be and what he was called to do. His cousin John knew who he was called to be and what he was called to do. He knew who he was called to be. Everybody that was standing there at the Jordan River the day that he was baptized knew who he was called to be because God had declared it right in front of them. But he had never been tested. He had never had to prove it. He never had to prove that he was the Messiah or even capable of being the Messiah. Maybe he didn't even know himself what he was capable of, or if he was worthy. And so he needed to prove himself by being tested in battle. For Jesus, this battle with Satan was a test. It was the classic proving the worth of the hero story. It's like in the movie, The Black Panther. I'm about to show you a scene real quick here in a minute, but it's like in the movie, The Black Panther, where the Black Panther mantle is passed on from the king to the son and down the line that way. And T'Challa, who's the main character in this story, his dad dies. He's the prince. He's about to be made the king, and he's about to become the Black Panther, who is the protector of Wakanda. And the question is, are you worthy of that? And so they would have a challenge day. And on this challenge day, anybody who thought that he wasn't worthy could challenge him for the throne. And so M'Baku, who is the leader of one of the tribes, challenges T'Challa for the throne of Wakanda.
Let the challenge begin. Just a boy, not fit to me. I am with T'Challa! Son of King T'Challa! You can do this, T'Challa! Don't make me kill you! Stop it, brother, son! Your people need you. Give it to us. T'Challa, the Black Panther. Zero, my king.
So just like T'Challa knew and M'Baku knew and all the people around there knew by the end of that battle that he was worthy to be the king and to be the Black Panther, when Jesus emerged from the wilderness, he knew, and Satan knew, and everybody who heard the story knew without a doubt that he was the real deal. They knew that they could trust Jesus as the hero to follow, because he had proven himself worthy by passing the test. He had undergone trial and temptation and remained steadfast. Now for us, that means two things. One is that, like the disciples trusted Jesus and followed him, we know that we can trust Jesus and follow him with the battles that we face. We know that because he has undergone every test, every temptation, every suffering, we know that he knows our struggles, that he knows our trials, that he knows the things that we face, the battles that we face, and he has the power to overcome them. It's a pretty awesome thing. But the other thing that it means for us is that Jesus later on tells his disciples that when we show ourselves worthy of our call, by being faithful in little things, then God will trust us with bigger things. And like Jesus, you have been called. But are you worthy? In the midst of your battles, are you taking the high road? Or are you taking the low road? In the midst of your trials and your tests, are you doing the right thing even though it's the hardest thing? Or are you taking the easy way out? In the midst of life, are you trusting God or relying on your own strength? Which brings us to the third word, trust. You see, the test that Jesus faced wasn't about being good. It wasn't a moral question that was being asked or needed to be answered. There wasn't any bad thing to avoid or a good thing to accomplish in order to pass the test. The question at the heart of Jesus' test was whether or not he really trusted God with his future and with his identity. I mean, look at Jesus' response. His first response to Satan about turning stones into bread. He said, it's written that people won't live by bread alone, which is a direct reference to these words in Deuteronomy. These words in Deuteronomy that God has for the people of Israel. He says, remember the long road on which the Lord your God led you during these 40 years in the desert, so that he could humble you, testing you to find out what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you by making you hungry and then feeding you the manna that neither you nor your ancestors had ever experienced, so that he could teach you that people don't live by bread alone. No, they live based on whatever the Lord says and does. During these 40 years, your clothes didn't swell up or didn't wear out, and your feet didn't swell up. God has taken care of you, and then God goes on to promise that they will be taken to the land where they will never hunger or thirst again, so long as they continue to trust God to be the source of all that they are and all that they do. Jesus passed this test because he trusted in God's promise. He trusted God to be his source of life, his source of strength, and his source of identity. In the midst of our lives and our wandering in the desert, I wonder, are you trusting God to be your source of life, your source of strength, and your source of identity? God promises to take care of us. God promises to give us an abundant life. God promises to provide for our needs. Do we trust God's promise? Or are we just swallowing stones and calling it bread? Are we just taking matters into our own hands and striving to make our own place in the world? Preparation, worthiness, and trust. Jesus' first battle prepared him for future battles. It showed that he was worthy to be the hero that we could follow and that we could trust. And it deepened his reliance, his dependence upon God. In the same way, if we lean on God in the midst of our battles, trusting God to be the source of life, to be our source of strength, to be our source of identity, to be the source of all that we are and all that we're called to do and to be, then we will have those gifts that we have been given perfected in us. We will have our call and our identity refined, that God will use